Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today, we're all losers, but we're all winners because we're going to be having a good discussion about board games. It's an episode focused on games we love losing. Do we love losing games? You'll have to listen in to see if we do. Jake says no. I think there's a lot of, I thought this would be interesting. Games failing is interesting. Losing is interesting. We're going to talk about the concept of winning and losing games in general and some games that we love playing despite them going wrong.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great topic. It's going to be a fun one. We're going to share some games, our favorite games that we like to lose at, or maybe the games we like, dislike losing the least in nice. My case.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about it. We had an interesting question in our Bridge channel in our Discord, which is our patron exclusive channel. That was who comes up with our show ideas, and just pull back the curtain. This is, like many of our episodes, one that Brendan just comes up with last minute because I'm lazy, and he's like, "Let's just do this," and I'm like, "Okay, perfect." So yeah, that's just a pull back the curtain a little bit. I would say you come up with probably like 75 or 80% of the episode topics.
Yeah. Usually, though, they're informed by, we'll just be having a random conversation about something, and then that in the Discord, maybe in the Bridge or elsewhere, and then that becomes a topic sort of organically.
Totally.
Or you're like, I'm interested in playing this game, we should play it. And then kind of that just teases up.
Then it's going to be one.
Yeah, because we can't afford to play games and not talk about them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Always be playing games
Games.
so we can talk about them on the podcast. Perfect. Before we get into this week's episode, we have another review to read, which I have right here. And this one comes in from, what does it say? Like unauthorized reviewer. Funny name.
Nice.
5-star review. And it's titled, "If you listen to one board game podcast, Decision Space is a good candidate." And this is a very kind, very long review. So I'm just going to read the end, which I think kind of summarizes, which just says, "It's easy to listen to. There's not a lot of fluff, but it doesn't feel overly dry and analytical. Definitely 5 out of 5 podcast. I highly recommend trying it out to anyone who likes board games. Maybe listen to an episode on a game you already have an opinion on and see for yourself what I mean. ... The only thing I don't love is the intro."
Yeah, I wonder if they know we had a different intro originally. They probably don't know that.
I also wonder if that's like they don't like our boilerplate text, or if it's the song.
Oh, yeah. It could be they don't like my reading of Welcome to Decision Space.
Yeah, let us know. Let us know.
Let us know.
But despite that, criticism is good. That's how we grow. We always appreciate thoughtful feedback. So despite that, I'm going to say it's a 10 out of 10 review.
That's definitely a 10 out of 10 review. Thank you so much, unauthorized reviewer, for taking the time. Also, one more little piece of housekeeping. Speaking of games we play and we'll probably cover, I think we mentioned this last week, but Five Tribes is a game that's recently gone into alpha on Board Game Arena, a Bruno Cathala game that was very popular when it first released and has a pretty unique sort of state of play. The structure of the game is different than a lot of games out there. It's a sort of Mancala adjacent game in which you are manipulating meeples in a shared space. It's certainly not completely unique to games Bruno Cathala has designed, but it's cool. And I think it's something Jake and I want to discuss on the show at some point, especially because we both enjoy Bruno Cathala games and haven't talked about any games he's designed in a while. So know that that's coming. We'll talk about Five Tribes at some point soon.
Perfect.
Speaking of games I enjoy despite losing.
Yeah, right. That's a great segue. So let's get into it. Games we love losing. Brendan, How do you want to do this? Should we just kind of go through our list of games like one at a time and say why? And then on the second half, get into what makes losing games fun?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We'll talk about some examples and then the unifying factors. And I want to note that just to kick this conversation off too, Jake, because there's this, when we said we were going to cover this in the Bridge, the channel you mentioned, our Patreon exclusive Discord channel, there was a lot of, I don't like losing ever, which I think was a little bit sarcastic from folks. But it reminded me that we need to contextualize this conversation somewhat, which is that there's these two modes of play that we can kind of have as players, where either we're sort of striving players, where we play games because we like getting better at them, and the goal isn't to win, but it is the objective, versus achievement play, where the goal and the objective are to win. And maybe you would feel this way if you were a professional athlete playing for money or something. And I think we both take the approach of being striving players in general, where winning for us isn't the point, but it always feels good to win. And if you want a broader discussion of striving play versus achievement play, check out episode 67 of this podcast, in which we talk with C.T. Wynn, a philosopher who writes and studies games, about his book, Games Agency as Art, and the striving play, achievement play framework is really, we've borrowed it from C.T. Wynn. So go ahead and go back to that episode, take a listen, and it'll be a great sort of kicking off point for more on striving play versus achievement play.
Awesome. Thanks, Brendan. So should we get into our list?
Yeah, let's do it. So Jake, what is a game you enjoy losing?
Yeah.
Or do you okay, wait, before we do that, do you enjoy losing games ever?
As opposed to winning them? I think only in the instance that I'm playing with somebody new, right? And I can like see their joy. Maybe like I've played with them a lot and won a majority of the games or something. And it's
Yeah.
like, or in our play group, maybe one player wins less often. And when they win, I'm like, hell yeah, that's awesome. Like we're all
Yeah.
having fun here. I mean, generally I try to win games and I'll be
Yeah.
more happy and kind of enjoy the play experience more when I win.
It's
So
it's
for me, my list isn't necessarily games I would have more fun when I lose than when I win, but more like games where there's like something that mitigates the losing that
yeah.
makes it so that I'm still have fun. Not that I don't have fun when I lose games, of course I do, but does that make sense? Like that's kind
Yeah,
of the distinction I want to draw. Like there's
totally.
something about this game that elevates the game even when losing
It's a
that
loss.
many other games don't have.
Yeah, totally. And for sure, and I know for both of us, winning is the objective, but not the point. But
Right.
I think in some ways, games are like a sundae, and winning puts a cherry on top. And I'd rather have a sundae with a cherry on top
And my
if I'm going to have a
orientation
sundae.
is probably like more of being a competitive jerk than you are. Like in my Monday night game group, we kind of everyone had like an anonymous poll of most competitive player, and I'm pretty sure I came out on top of that poll. Like
Nice.
that
Yeah.
is my orientation towards like I just tend to like really strive to do as good as I can, where
Yeah.
other players are more like you are more like I want to explore different avenues.
Definitely.
And I'm like, I found a great avenue to win, so I'm just going to keep
I'm going to
hammering that
always
until
do
it
this.
stops
Yeah.
working
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
me. Yeah,
Totally. But with that said, whenever
yeah,
I play, I'd love to win. There's
of
no,
course.
yeah. Okay, so do you
Yeah,
want to, you go
I'll
first.
start. Yeah, so my first game is Cockroach Poker. And this is a very simple card game where a bluffing game where you're trying to not be the person who collects four of the same critter, whether that's a cockroach or a fly or a stink bug or whatever. As soon as you collect your fourth of one type, you lose. And the way you collect it is basically you pass somebody a card and I say, Brendan, this is not a cockroach. And then you can either pass it on to somebody else or you can say, you have two choices. You can say it is a cockroach because you believe me and flip it over, or you say it's not. And if you flip it and call it correctly, then I have to take the card. If you're wrong, you have to take the card. So one thing that makes this game separate from a lot of other games in the lost condition is as soon as one person loses, everybody else immediately wins the game. So there's just like a moment of euphoria by everybody else at the table. And that takes this, you might think it's worse to lose in a type of game where there's only one loser and everyone else wins. But I think it's like the sheer bliss at what you've done, like creating happiness for everybody else all at once. For me, it takes the sting out of losing, and it makes it kind of a fun experience. Like I was able to give everybody else this happiness. So that's part
Yeah.
one. The other part of this is like because there's only one loser, you don't have the experience of like I got fifth place out of five players. I didn't just
Right.
lose to one person. I lost to four other players in the game,
Yeah.
right? And maybe one person ran away with it. This is my experience playing Wonderland War at last game night.
Mm.
Was one person kind of ran away with it. Everybody else was clumped up, and I was last in that clump. So it's like, dang, I got dominated by Tyler, who won the game, and then everybody else, I was still performed the worst. So that, everybody's kind of like, oh man, what a bummer. Tyler ran away with it. I lost by this many points. It's like, think about me. I did the worst, and so having just one single loser, it kind of illuminates like the extra feel bad for when
Sure.
you're just like last or a distant last.
This is something I'll talk about some too, but I think for Cockroach Poker, there's also this element of there's nice spectacle in the game, and some of the point is just it's fun to like
Yeah.
say to lie to your friends, to bluff to your friends, right? So whether you win or lose, it's just like you get to watch funny things happen, and whether it's happening to you, it's just like the point isn't to win or lose in Cockroach Poker;
Right.
it's to lie to your friends, and it's quick.
Yeah, it's quick and there's not much game there. So you don't feel like, wow, I'm like stupid because I lost
Yeah.
this game.
Yeah.
You're
Like the resistance, which is not on my list. I
Yeah.
want to win the resistance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Cockroach Poker also has everybody teaming up on one person too,
Right.
which makes it
Yeah.
like fun. Like you're like just like trying to survive this like gauntlet once you're like in a bad position. That makes it like when you finally succumb, you're like, I gave it my all.
Yeah, totally. Thank goodness I've lost. Yeah. Okay. So the first game on my list, Jake, I think this is a game you would disagree with, but I just
100%.
don't mind. I love El Grande. And I
Your whole
don't.
list, I just like, what are you doing? I
How
can't
could you feel
wait.
this way?
Yeah.
So El Grande is a classic Seminole area control game in which you're adding meeples to a board or cubes, depending on the version, trying to control majorities in these different areas. And for me, I think the reason I love winning El Grande, it feels great. But I think the reason why I love El Grande, even when I lose, there's a few parts. One, I find the flow and the rhythm of El Grande just really rewarding. It's a game that usually has a nice pace. There's 9 rounds with 3 scoring opportunities. And I think that game just is the perfect length that it feels like it flies, but it still has a nice arc to it. So I find the experience of just experiencing the arc of El Grande, the planning, to be really rewarding, whether I win or lose. And a key part of that is the hand of cards that you have. You have this hand of cards that range in value from, is it 1 to 12, something in that realm. And you have to manage them throughout the game.
Yeah,
You usually
1 to 13.
1 to 13. Thank you. You don't get them back, except for maybe a couple. There's a couple actions that you can get, but I think it just gives the game this really strong sense of planning that's fun whether you win or you lose. 2, you can have a real impact on the outcome of the game even when you're behind. I've found El Grande is you have to tactically sort of make decisions to maybe gang up on who's winning and or not. And I think that for me, it's fun. The reveal of whenever the Castillo, this mechanism where you add your cubes to this shared location that score, and then you get a chance to score them again when you send them out. You make a simultaneous choice, everyone at the table. That's fun. I really like that moment. And it's one of my favorite decisions in games because it's impactful, it's dramatic, and usually you have these memorable moments where you say, like, "Why did you do that?" So I just enjoy that sort of decision where it's simultaneous in nature and it's fun whether you're winning or you're losing. I like to try to get value out of those and read my opponents, and it really encourages that. And then, so I think those are really the contributing factors to why I don't mind losing El Grande. But the final one, and I'll talk about this with some of my other examples, is I think El Grande has pretty good feedback. So when I lose, I usually have a sense of why I lost. Oh, I contributed. I went too hard on this one region when everyone was dogpiling in there, and I should have gone elsewhere and cut my losses. And I think that if I'm playing a longer strategy game, something 60 minutes or more, I don't mind losing it as long as I'm learning, right? That's that striving play mindset. And I feel like every time I lose El Grande, I have something to noodle on and think about of why I lost. I don't just walk away from something like maybe Terra Mystica going, well, I did poorly again. I don't really know where I went wrong. I don't like losing Terra Mystica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. I love El Grande. Super fun game. I think like it doesn't necessarily have like mitigating factors that make it winning or losing less pronounced,
Yeah.
with the exception for me of the fact that it usually stays pretty close up to the end. And then the final point scoring, that's a full significant amount of the points you'll get in the whole game, and including like where people put send stuff from the Castillo. So you really may not know where you stand until the very end. And I think that in of itself makes losing not as bad. Like the worst
Yeah.
losing for me is when you're just like out of a game early on. And that
Sure.
can happen in El Grande, but generally does not.
Yeah.
At least in my experience. There might always there's probably somebody who feels like they're kind of out of it. But anyway, that's El Grande. I'm going to move on to my next game,
Okay.
which is RoboRally, another kind of silly fun game. So you might already start be noticing a theme in my game, or in my games, that I mind losing the least, or I should say love losing at. The thing with RoboRally goes straight back to the CT Win book, where he talks in that book about stupid games where the point is to win, but the actual like best part of the game is when somebody fails spectacularly, and that's RoboRally to a T. Right, the game puts a time pressure on you to quickly. It's a programming game, a race game where you have cards, a hand of cards that have basically directional inputs, and you're trying to race across a grid board to a flag and maybe back and dodge lasers and bump into people. And very funny things can happen where if you either get bumped or make one small miscalculation, you end up way in a different place than you thought you would be when you finished laying out the cards in your turn. And it's hilarious. And so that's why RoboRally makes this list for me, because the best moments in RoboRally is when somebody's turn goes horribly awry. And I don't mind when that happens to me. And in fact, it's really hilarious, especially if, and it requires that everybody's like making the good faith effort to succeed.
Yeah.
And then it's hilarious when they fail.
I think that this is a really insightful game for this topic, Jake, because it highlights the importance of agency maybe in our experience of losing, right? Where when when there's so much uncertainty around what's going to happen, it's a pretty high randomness game or high uncertainty game. So you can kind of hide behind like, how could I have known, right? And it almost softens the blow rather than this really high agency, pretty deterministic game. Sometimes those can feel worse to lose because you think like, oh, I just made poor decisions strategically.
I think it's a little more nuanced than that. I do agree with you that randomness can definitely soften the blow of losing. But I think with RoboRally specifically, the thing that makes it funny when somebody fails is it often comes down to like your own bandwidth to quickly lay
Interesting.
out a sequence of cards. Right?
Sure.
That's like the stupid games that people play at house parties or whatever, like Twister, right? You actually
Yeah.
have complete agency in that game, or not really,
Yeah.
I guess, because you're random dial or whatever, but you have a lot of agency. It's just a matter of like you actually physically
Can't
can't
do it.
do
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
that's when it's funny. uh it's funny because somebody fails, not necessarily that and it's okay that the twister dial or whatever, the spinner, contributes to that. So that's kind of like the randomness that you're talking about. The uncertainty in RoboRally is like the other things that can happen, but ultimately it's funny because it's kind of like a player's own agency is failing,
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
where
Do you
like
think
just rolling bad is not funny, right?
is
If somebody's like, you keep rolling three doubles in Monopoly, now you have to go to jail. That's not really funny because it's totally random. It's funny because there actually is a significant amount of agency that somebody had to not have had what happened to them happen.
how do you feel about losing at Jenga?
Yeah, I almost put Jenga on this list for
Yeah.
that same reason. It fits almost both into the Cockroach Poker and RoboRally
Yeah.
thing, where it's like elation for everybody else when you lose.
Yeah.
Jenga is a little bit more delicate though, or fragile, because I think a lot of times people just do dumb stuff in Jenga. They're
Yeah.
like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna try for this like crazy hard piece, and everybody's like, why are you gonna do that? It's gonna fall over, and it falls over, and you're kind of like, well,
Everyone knew that was going to happen.
yeah.
But losing at Jenga when everyone's trying their best and kind of optimally is selecting pieces can be really thrilling. And I think the thrill of a loss can be a great reason to enjoy it, you
And
know?
softened by everybody else immediately
Being
celebrating.
elated. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, great. But key point there, everyone has to be trying. Otherwise, it's no fun to lose a game.
that's the stupid game golden
That's
rule.
exactly. Stupid game golden rule. Okay. My next game, Jake, is a game I adore and played over 100 times, and that is Cascadia. I find Cascadia, this is a tile laying game in which you're drafting terrain tiles that you're laying out in this sort of puzzle, kind of putting them together, trying to create contiguous areas of the same type of terrain. While at the same time, those terrains show habitats for 5 different types of animals, but they always only show a subset. So maybe there's between 1 and 3 types of animals that could go on any habitat tile. So you're drafting in an intertwined fashion an animal tile and a terrain, and then adding them both to a personal little area where you're building out your terrain and then playing animals into it. Cascadia is a thinky but relaxing puzzle game that I don't mind losing. I really like to win Cascadia, but I find this is another game, Jake, where Cascadia has variable scoring conditions, where there's always the same 5 types of animal in the game, but the way those animals score might be different. There's a few cards for each animal. So bears generally want to be clumped together, but how they want to be clumped together will vary. Maybe they want to be in pairs or maybe groups of 3. It just depends. And I think that the reason why I love playing Cascadia even when I lose is because the puzzle of figuring out how to optimize the terrain and the animals together is intrinsically fun. It's if I don't play Cascadia better than someone else at the table, I oftentimes still have fun with the process of looking at the objectives, drafting in the first few turns, and figuring out what my goal for this game should be. Maybe there's a hawk scoring card. Hawks usually don't, unlike bears, don't want to be next to each other. One of them that kind of allows you to create this hub and spoke sort of scoring where you get a hawk and then you kind of like have hawks surrounding it, that I find to be really fun. And there's a lot of uncertainty around if you can sort of achieve a certain scoring objective. Foxes can be this way too, where they're really challenging to lay out. And I think that I have fun playing Cascadia when I lose because I can feel myself getting better at doing that core puzzle in a way that's just really rewarding. It's fun to complete a puzzle if it's a puzzle and not a game. And I still have fun doing the puzzle within a game environment, if that makes sense.
Totally. I have 2 questions for you on this one. And the first is like Cascadia is, I know it might not be literally your number 1 game on your top
Yeah.
10 list, but it's one of your favorite games.
Yeah.
And I think I was thinking about my own list. Like, do I just put a game like a Castles of Burgundy on here? Because like I
Sure.
love playing it, and I'll be happy to play the game regardless of outcome because I always have a good time playing. So is that a piece of this here where it's just like, hell
I
yeah, I'm glad to lose Cascadia because that means I get to play my favorite game.
I brought it up. It's interesting. I was thinking about this yesterday. I was talking about the prompt with Maya, my wife, who's been on the show before, actually to discuss Babylonia. And Maya was like, "Oh, you'll just put Babylonia on the list, right?" Because I love Babylonia, and it's probably right now my favorite game still. But I hate losing at Babylonia. In part, I think because it's one of my favorite games, I want to be good at it. And the core puzzle, because it's not personal, I think when I lose at Babylonia, I feel like I got outsmarted more so
Yes.
than in Cascadia, where when I lose at Cascadia, I feel like I got unlucky a little bit. And I think that's a deciding factor. The nature of variability really shifts the experience. And when I finish Cascadia, I can look down and be like, oh, that's what I accomplished. And Babylonia has an element of that. You're building up this board over the course of play. But for some reason, a lot of Babylonia is about the points you score on the journey to the end of the game. Whereas Cascadia, because you scored at the end, I think that you can be in a situation in Babylonia where you're losing and you're on a ride that is painful. But in Cascadia, oftentimes you don't know that to the end, which I think sometimes can obfuscate the pain of being in a distant third or whatever that you can
Yeah.
have in one of those other games that you score as you go. So I guess that's the difference.
I think
Yeah,
I think that goes into a point that we've mentioned before that here, right, where we're talking about like if you know you're in last place and out of it early on,
yeah,
it's not probably super fun for the rest of the time that you're playing. It can be. People have better attitudes about that than me, of course, but with just not having a score track, right?
yeah.
Maybe that in and of itself is something that can make the pain of losing a little
A
bit
little
less
less.
bad.
Yeah,
Um, so okay, so that makes sense, and it also kind of feeds into my second question for you, which is there something about multiplayer solitaire games
yeah.
that like lead into your personal board? Because that's kind of the same with like Castle of Burgundy or something like that. Win or lose, I'm doing my thing and I'm having a good time doing it.
Definitely. I think so, Jake. And I think that part of it is because oftentimes in multiplayer solitaire games, I don't know if this is a claim that I can make fully, but
Make it, say it.
it's fun to
Go on
just
the record.
look down and see what you've accomplished making, right? There's some intrinsic fun in that. No one else had their hand in messing it up, maybe, except for maybe denying something that you wanted to add. In Babylonia, I can get blocked from accomplishing something I wanted to accomplish. And there's no like looking at the board that's not, this is my kingdom, this is my area. Whereas in Cascadia, I can just look down and see, like, oh, this is what I built, right? And I think that's intrinsically fun to make something. Fun whether you win or lose, to put something together. And I think that I enjoy games that I've lost where I've made something and no one's messed it up directly, at least.
I think we just stumbled onto something really interesting here that now sounds simple, but I'm not sure I've heard it really expressed, or at least commonly, which is that one of the great things, I think we can just simplify and say one of the advantages of a multiplayer solitaire style game is that
Yeah.
they're less painful to lose.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Cool.
Nice. Good insight, Brendan. All right, my next one is a group of games, and it also feeds into something we brought up before, talking about these other games. And this is like fun kind of party style performance games. So
Yeah.
Wavelength, Monikers, and Poetry for Neanderthals are some of my favorites to break out at a party. And these games are not painful to lose for one reason, because they're just like simple, so you don't feel like bad because you aren't like spending hours over a board like testing your brain to its max capacity. So there's that going on. But I think the bigger piece about it is like when you're getting dominated by a team at Monikers, it's amazing to watch. And it's fun to just sit there and revel in somebody, charading their way through 20 cards in a minute. And you
Yeah.
have to just like applaud that. The same with
Totally.
Wavelength when people are hitting bullseye, or Poetry for Neanderthal, right? People are doing a really good job getting clues. That's fun. And also getting like bonked if you mess up, making a
Yeah.
good faith effort. That falls more into like the stupid game categories. Like you really tried to do it and then you messed it up. So
Yeah.
you got bonked, and that's funny. So that's kind of my another category of games that I love losing in.
That's interesting. That's almost the joy of the spectacle of someone else succeeding being the cushion of losing.
Right.
And sort of saying like, wow, you're really playing this optimally. And as someone who loves games, it can be fun to watch
Right.
someone
Like
really
you knew
succeed.
that pants were like exactly 75% to like appropriately rated to not appropriately rated.
Yeah.
It's like, how?
Yeah, right. It's interesting. A game that comes to mind for me where I don't feel this way is Just One. I
Yeah.
don't. So Just One
Okay.
is cooperative.
That's the huge difference.
Yeah, and losing Just One, I'm going to be really frank, feels like it's like the whole table lets out a wet fart. It's just awful. I hate it.
Put a pin in that to games you hate losing, which we might have time for at the very end.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so the next game on my list, Jake, is one that I know you don't like losing. And I'm going to try to, thread the needle on why I just don't mind losing Barrage. Barrage is the opposite of multiplayer solitaire. It's the opposite of a relaxing game like Cascadia. It is a really cutthroat, interactive, on the board game in which you can completely derail and should derail each other's plans, cutting each other off, just moving water in a way down this board that the other players, that really negatively affects other players. This is a shared place-based game about producing energy from water that's coming down a mountain. You also have this worker placement game where you're blocking other people's spaces, and this cool wheel system where it takes time to get access to resources that you've spent. And the way that you get access to them back is by spending more resources to push them around this wheel. Jake, Barrage, I don't like losing. I don't mind losing. I really like to win at Barrage. Winning at Barrage feels amazing. Part of that is because it's a high agency game. But I think the reason why I don't mind losing is because of what I said about El Grande and feedback. In Barrage, oftentimes when you lose, you know why you lost. It's really clear. Jake cut me off here and also got access to this really good upgrade tile in round 2 that he used to build out this novel strategy. That was fun to see. So it can feel painful to be losing Barrage. Like in the moment, to be behind, not fun. Everyone else is making tons of energy. You're struggling to produce anything. Maybe you don't have much infrastructure. But I find that because I like seeing how people can put down really high scores in Barrage, I don't really mind losing as long as I'm playing it. So this might fall into that category, Jake, of what you were mentioning, where I just enjoy Barrage. So seeing other people do well at it gives me ideas that I can employ in the future. And if I lost, I usually know why I lost, which is a key feature in me not really being bothered by it, because at least I can explain it and then try to do better next time. I think if Barrage didn't have clear feedback, I wouldn't enjoy losing it as much.
Yeah, I like that clear feedback as a factor that can definitely mitigate the feel bad of losing. Like, I want to
Sure.
try that differently next time. And
Yep.
anytime you're saying that to yourself at the end of the game, you're probably not dwelling on how bad it felt to lose.
Right.
The other thing I want to say about Barrage is it's interesting that you bring it up because I think it had one of the widest gulfs for me of like that my expectation of how brutal the game was going to feel to when I actually finally got around to playing it.
Mm,
Like I straight up didn't want to learn and play this game because
yeah.
my expectation was it's going to be this brutal cutthroat thing that's going to somebody's going to cut you off and then you're just going to be like out of the game and can't do anything. I would
Yeah.
say Barrage is way more like Cascadia and Castles of Burgundy than you think if you haven't
Mm,
played Barrage. Because I
yeah.
found that even though I might be hundreds of points away from first place in my first learning plays of the game, you still get the same amount of actions. Like you still have like some type of economy, and there's always actions you want to be doing on your turn that make it like fun to play and learn with
Yeah.
compared to another type of game where you might be like, I just didn't get my engine going and now I can't do anything. You
Yeah.
never feel like that in Barrage.
Yeah.
So I think maybe part of it, this one in particular being here, is that I think like the lore and expectations of this game aren't actually aligned with the reality of what it feels like to play and lose at this game.
Sure. There's always enough room in Barrage that when a strategic door closes, there's some other door that's open and you just have to find it.
You never really have a turn where you're like, I don't want to do anything. Like
Yeah.
even when you're getting dominated, there's still more stuff you want to do than you have
Sure.
like workers to do.
Yeah. Oh, I'll get this contract and then I can turn it in on a future turn. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
At least I'll aim for that. Cool.
Okay, so my last one, Brendan, I need some help from you on this. It's another couple of games. I paired these together. They're straight auction games,
Yeah.
Raw and High Society by Reiner Knizia. And I included this on this list, even though I don't really know why I don't mind losing them. But I
Yeah.
love these games and I never win them. Like I never win these games.
Yeah.
And yet I keep bringing them out to play. And I don't know why I don't mind not I clearly
Winning.
love losing at them because that's all I do and I love these
Sure.
games.
Yeah.
Why? That's my
So
question.
High Society was on my list that I almost included it. I was thinking about it this morning. So you are not alone. I think there's a couple things going on here, but I think a huge factor here, Jake, is what we talked about earlier. These are both games that you don't have a sense for. In Raw, you have a sense for who might be winning and losing throughout, but it's really scored at the end. And High Society, you really have no sense. I mean, you might, but the point of High Society is that whoever has spent the most money cannot win. So there's always this question, is the person who's doing the best, getting the most stuff, really doing the best? That's the point of the game. So I think that when there's a loser and a winner decided, it's a dramatic moment that's exciting, and you never have the midstream play of, am I suffering? And when you're winning in this game, you always are wondering, when you're quote unquote winning, if you've scored the most points, am I actually losing? So it's a game that obfuscates sort of the tension around who's winning and losing in a way that's fun. Also, Raw's just there's so much random fun in Raw. It's like auction,
Yeah.
gamble, puzzle. Like,
Right.
it's
It's got a
great.
little bit of that performance stuff. The other
Yeah.
thing about these games too is like it almost for me is on the opposite far end of the spectrum from Barrage in terms of feedback. Like when I'm playing these games, it feels like jazz. Like sometimes you want to just like bid for stuff early. Like, well,
Yeah.
let's just take High Society, right?
Yeah.
Like there there's no set value. Like this is how much the 7 point card should go for. because
Yeah.
it's so contingent upon what other people are bidding. The values are going to change drastically from game
Right.
to game. That like every time you enter the game, you're just like, I have no effing clue what's going on here.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to like bid heavy early and then drop back and then pop back in. So yeah, I don't know. I still don't really know, but clearly, I think there's something about like the pure auction game
Yeah.
that for me, it just I don't mind losing at it because I think it's just so interesting to watch and fun, and I don't understand it, and I know I don't understand it. So then why would I be mad when I lose?
I think it's interesting you didn't include modern art. I think that's partially a function of you just like these auction games more.
Yeah,
But I also think, Jake, that something going on here is that it's more fun to lose games where people can't scrutinize your decisions. So if I'm publicly making a decision in a game like, I don't know, in a game like Barrage, even though I enjoy losing Barrage, I can make objective mistakes in Barrage, right? And that can feel bad. I make a decision, everyone's kind of looking at me going, if maybe this is my first play, maybe someone says, Brendan, I don't know if you realize this. You could make that move, but it's probably strategically a blunder. That doesn't feel good. Like, no one wants to be like, oh, you're publicly the dummy. And it can feel that way, even with a good Magic Circle and a community that's supportive in playing. It feels bad to make a bad decision publicly. And I think in raw and high society, there's so much uncertainty, like you said, about what things are worth, that it never feels like it's kind of the opposite. There's like so little feedback that there's no public feedback of the fact that you made a bad choice. Whereas in modern art, you could just bid, you can bid really wrong and you can look really silly, you know?
right.
I don't know.
Yeah,
There's something there
there's
about like
something
the
there.
scrutiny of your decisions publicly being not fun. And in auction games, it's a little more obfuscated because I don't know, people don't know what you're going to get in the future. There's
Yeah,
less right and wrong,
yeah.
even though ultimately,
And the other
yeah.
difference between the two is like raw and high site limit your agency on what you can bid.
Yeah.
So you have that kind of like defense mechanism a
Oh, I
little
was
bit.
forced to bid this
Right.
amount.
Be like,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is worth like 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, but I can only bid 8. So I'm
Yeah.
just gonna do that.
Right. It's kind of like cover for those decisions that
Right.
you're making.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Your hand is more forced. I think that's a great point, Jake. Interesting. Okay. Well, my final game, I tried to, include strategy games somewhat, and you have as well. But I wanted to include one game that was
I
really
know.
light and fun to play, and that's Coconuts. Coconuts is a dexterity game in which you have a little. It's basically a gamified toy. You have a monkey that has these sort of spring-loaded arms and these little rubber coconuts. So you put the coconut in the monkey's arms, you use it to launch the coconut. So you're almost playing something like Tiddlywinks, except you're using this spring-loaded monkey hands to launch the coconut up in the air behind his head or her head into these cups around the table. And the coconuts are not perfectly round, meaning they bounce all strangely. You can never expect which way they're going to go. So Coconuts is, you know, Coconuts is one of those games where it doesn't feel bad losing because it's so close to not being a game that it like whatever, right? Like obviously I want to win. And Coconuts is a dexterity game you can win. There are some dexterity games where it's so close to like we're just doing an activity. Coconuts has a winner. And it's clear someone shot the coconuts in the cups better by the end of it. But it's just fun. It's fun to use the little monkeys to throw the little coconuts. It's fun to feel yourself getting better at this weird activity as you go. And usually silly things happen that give you fun little stories, or you make some crazy shot and maybe you don't win, but you make a shot that is harder than any shot anyone else made the whole time. So you have the little feather in your cap that you made this crazy shot that you called. It's just fun. The process of playing is way more fun than actually winning it, which isn't the case with all games. And I think the because of the dexterity element, it is that way. It's like you get to play with a toy. It's fun. I don't know.
Hearing you talk about that reminds me so much of my experience playing Strike recently, which is
Mm.
the dumbest game of all time.
Great. Yeah.
You basically can't even argue against that. You're rolling these dice into like a bowl, and if you get an
Yeah.
X, it comes out of the bowl, and you're trying to be the last person with dice. And if you roll doubles, you get to take them back to your personal supply. And the thing with Strike that makes it like Coconuts fit so well on this list, I think, is that when you lose, you know objectively that like this is not a game. This is the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah.
But somehow like your brain neurons break down because when you win, Like when I win a game of Strike, it's like I've
I'm the
figured it
best.
out. I'm
Yeah.
the best
Yeah.
at Strike,
Yeah.
and I'll probably always win at Strike. Like
Yeah.
you really, it's like it's just functioning perfect on both ends of the spectrum. I imagine Coca's the same. Where you're
Yeah.
like, when you win, you're like, I'm actually good at
I'm
this, and
amazing
I
at coconuts.
deserve
Yeah.
to win. Whereas if you
Yeah.
lose, you're like, well, whatever. It's totally random.
Yeah. 100%. Yes. Love it. So Jake, I wanted to make sure to pull in games people enjoyed losing from our Discord too, because sometimes we'll talk about our show notes in our bridge channel before the show. And friend of the show, Matt R, had a comment that I think will do well here too. And it kind of covers some of what we've talked about, but it's a game that I know Matt is not the only person who feels this way about, that it's fun to lose. And that's Galaxy Trucker. So Matt says about Galaxy Trucker, the game is at its best when the entire table is laughing at watching your spaceship being demolished. If everyone is doing well, it can be boring. Schadenfreude, pleasure in other people's pain, that's my inclusion, is great with this game. My wife wants me to share her quote, "It's the best game to lose." I think that really captures it. Yeah,
Yeah.
games centered around the spectacle of loss. And again, this is another example. I haven't played Galaxy Trucker, but it's another example where you don't have a ton of agency around the losing part usually. You sort of race to build your ships, and then you almost, there's randomized events that your ship has to deal with. So at that point, you're just kind of watching the loss happen in a fun way that's like slapstick comedy for the whole table.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that was actually a really great conversation. I think pretty insightful as to what makes losing games fun.
Yeah.
So maybe we can try and in the next part of the episode, just really quickly like pull forward some of those themes and see if we can't come up with like a more comprehensive list of elements that a game might have that
Sure.
makes losing fun or at least takes the edge off.
Yeah. Perfect.
And I'll start. So one thing is, I think if there's a single loser, that is in and of itself is an element. That's the Jenga, that's the cockroach poker. Where I think if one person loses, especially if it like is it's not like whoever gets last on like a random Euro game loses and everybody else technically wins. Like something that's like in a moment, right? Where
Yeah.
a sudden immediate loss condition that triggers and then everybody else wins. That's something that makes losing fun.
Do you think that there's something to that, Jake, too, of just the baseline human desire of like, I don't, in that way, losing almost feels like an accomplishment.
Like
If I'm
I'm
the only one.
totally Jenga, like, and I think that's why Jenga's like can be fragile because people are like want to make themselves the center of attention, kind of,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you're the one person that lose, it's like I'm the special one,
I stand
actually.
alone.
That's
Yeah.
right. I think you
Yeah.
might be onto something.
Interesting. So something else that does, and I think this came up a little bit, but I want to mention, I really don't mind losing a game when there's some form of, I'm going to use a funny term, but ludonarrative equity, which is something Mark Rosewater talks about, which means basically me
Yes.
playing this
I
game.
mean, we all know what you mean, but like, why don't you go ahead and just tell the listeners?
So it means when I'm playing this game, what I'm getting out of it is the fun, but what I'm also getting out of it is a story that I can tell people in the future. So Mark Rosewater is the head designer of Magic the Gathering, and he talks about how Magic's a cool game because even if you're losing, sometimes you get ludonarrative equity. So there's interesting edge cases that can potentially come out of those games where you might not remember who wins or loses a game, but something cool happened and you can talk about it. And it becomes a story that maybe your group perpetuates. Oh, remember that time that Maya accomplished this really wild thing and won from behind. That's fun, and it can eclipse the caring about who won and lost, and just gives you this cultural moment that can go on to live. This moment when we were playing the Resistance and this happened, that can be fun. And I think that makes me losing games less painful when you sort of get something you can take with you in the form of a story.
Yeah, that's a good one. Another one I'll add is being able to like revel games where you can revel in the performance of your opponent.
Yeah.
And I think this happens a lot with party games that are really built to enable this, like a Monikers, but it can also happen in strategy games. I think a little bit of what you hit on even in your
Barrage.
discussion of Barrage is like sometimes somebody's engine just goes insane and
Yeah.
you watch them reach heights that you just thought were not possible,
Yeah.
and they're like, it's one thing to be like lose somebody by 50 points. It's another thing to lose somebody by like 250
Yeah.
points, and that just stops and makes you go, "Wow, that was impressive."
There can
Yeah.
Twitch exists for a reason. It's fun to watch other people be good at games, right? And growing up, I had plenty of afternoons where I'd watch my friend who owned a video game play it because it's fun to watch someone be good at something. Professional sports are kind of in this way. So I think that's a great point, that if you just enjoy a game, watching someone be good at it becomes,
Yeah.
yeah. Why do people love ballet? It's amazing watching the spectacle. Yeah. Okay, cool. Jake, another thing we talked about is just the inherent fun of building something. That if you're playing a game that allows you to maybe make a little town in front of you, Keyflower comes to mind, where you sort of build up this little square. Keep losing Keyflower can feel really bad because there's a huge potential for people to really get at you. But I don't mind losing Keyflower a ton because I have a high agency, and also at the end I get to look at kind of my approach, and I see my whole strategy kind of laid out as a metaphorical little town in front of me. And that's fun, just the act of bringing them together that you don't have in, say, losing a game of spades. I can't look back and say, oh, I accomplished this. I built this little thing. No, I just did bad.
So usually, I think this is what we're getting at with multiplayer solitaire style games are less painful to lose than
Yeah.
more interactive games a lot of time. And yeah, I think that functions on a lot of different axes. You get to build something, you get to feel that sense of accomplishment. Also, like a lot of times that means the losing is less like I was outplayed, right? It was like I got a
Yeah.
little bit unlucky to your point about Cascadia, and that can also soften the blow.
Yep.
Another one I want to make sure we include in this comprehensive list is the stupid game one, where games that are fun and funny when
Yeah.
bad things happen to players. That's Galaxy Truckers. That's RoboRally, and and Twister at parties, stuff like that. Where
Yep.
as long as everybody's trying, when something goes bad, it actually elicits like fun moments. And when
Yep.
that's happening, even when you're the person that bad things are happening to, you're part of the fun.
Yeah. I think that both of those, almost in a way, I would count as sort of observing novel game states. So both the like losing stupid games and reveling in the performance of your opponents, both are, it's fun to see the state in which either this game went really wrong or this game went really well for someone, right? And just seeing the game contain whatever multitude that it contained is kind of the fun in and of itself. Or just like, yeah, laughing at your friend losing a Jenga. Another one for me, Jake, is I'd mentioned games with high skill ceiling and clear feedback can make losing fun because that's driving play, right? I have room to get better and I know how I can get better by making this change. That's fun. I like getting better at games. So if I'm losing, but I know how I can get better at playing it, I'm going to care less than if I lose and I have no idea what I did wrong or what I should do differently next time. And I think that's a huge part of why I enjoy losing games like Barrage, where every time I play, I feel like I get a little bit better, even though I keep losing.
Yeah. And I think on the opposite side of that spectrum, I do think there's something to games that are always so different and like you can't come up with clear heuristics. That's kind of like the auction games that I was talking
Mm,
about before, where there's an element of like every time I play this game, right? It feels like jazz, right? You're just
yeah,
like, I'm just going with the flow, man. Like, this is totally different than what's happened with this game before, but it's happening. And I'm going to just try and roll with it and see if I can pick up a note to riff on.
yeah,
So I think there's something there too, like games both on one hand that are high on the end of the spectrum that enables like you to learn from your mistakes, and also games that are just like going to be completely novel each time you play it. For me,
yep,
both those games mitigate the sourness of losing
yeah.
for opposite reasons.
Awesome. I think this might be the final thing for me that I have as really a bucket, Jake, which is games that have a satisfying arc in and of themselves are more fun to lose than games that don't. So there's some games where just the flow and pace of the game itself is entertaining, it's energetic, it's fun to experience. Not all games are like that, right? Like some games are fun despite their arcs being weird, or their regular play patterns not being the most rewarding, and other games aren't. And I think that for me, that's a huge piece of it. The Castles of Burgundy comes to mind for me, Jake, as a game. You really like the arc of that game. For me, it doesn't work as well. I like Castles of Burgundy despite it always sort of feels the same. Like it wanes in the same exact way every time. So I like it despite the arc, but I don't really like losing the Castles of Burgundy, which is a bummer for me because I'm not that great at it. But in contrast, something like El Grande, when I am losing, just the arc of that game and the play pattern is so fun that I care a little bit less. Like there's just energy to the way that game goes that make the costs of, if a game doesn't drag, it doesn't feel as bad to lose it.
Yeah.
I think it's another way to put it.
I'm really glad you bring this up. I think there's something to the narrative, right? Like a narrative arc of a game,
Yeah.
which can also be really satisfying. And I think a great example of this is Dune or Twilight Imperium, games that are like these truly epic games. If those games were terrible to lose at, like if losing in those games was a horrible thing, people would not play them.
Yep.
You would not set aside 10 hours to play a 6-player game of Twilight Imperium where only one person is ultimately going to lose if the other 5 players are going to have a bad time.
Yep.
And I think the thing that's happening in these epic games is like you get a really satisfying narrative story.
Yeah.
So I think that's something we absolutely have to include in this list as well.
Totally.
Kind of couple that with mechanical game arc, like the narrative game arc too.
Yep. I think a piece of this too, Jay, because if a game feels like it's dragging, it emphasizes how much fun it can be to losing, right? If you're stuck sitting at the table being like, I'm going to lose this and I have to sit here for 30 more minutes, that's no fun. Like no one wants to, So that's, I think, how I kind of got at that idea too.
I think that's a great list.
Yeah.
And lastly, before we close this episode, games, and we could maybe do this as a whole. This was really fun. I think insightful. Maybe it's worth doing the opposite as an episode at some point in the future. But as a teaser, like games you hate losing. I was going to start like my number one thing on this list, which I think is just an interesting thing to include because I so often hear the opposite perspective put forward is cooperative games. Like people seem to love losing cooperative games. I hate it. It's just like people are like, oh, if you're winning a cooperative game more than 15% of the time, it's like not appropriately balanced. That just has never rung true to me. And in fact, every time I've brought a cooperative game out with friends,
and they've
lose. Been happy when we won. And when we lose, it goes all over like a wet fart, I think, to use your colorful language about just one from earlier.
Jake, I totally agree. And I think part of this is that we both aren't big cooperative gamers. We don't play a lot of cooperative games. So I think when we play them, we want to have the experience of winning them, which is kind of funny. But I could see if I was only playing cooperative games, it diminishes the fun of winning if you're only ever winning. But if you don't play them that often, you want to feel like you did the thing. You beat the game. And I think that because of our preference for competitive games, that's why we kind of feel that way. So it doesn't feel good to lose cooperative games. Like, the sunk cost thing comes up that I was talking about with longer games somewhat too, where this isn't the right way to feel. But if I'm spending an hour playing Burgle Bros and then I lose, it can feel like, oh, I didn't spend my time in a way that I wish I would have a little bit. Like I care about winning co-op games more than I care about winning competitive games.
I think like an exception that proves the rule in this case, for me, is the Arkham Horror living card game, which is a game where you always lose, but you continue. You lose a scenario and you're still playing the next scenario. And, maybe like you're going to be entering that scenario with like in a worse position than if you had done better. But that's fine because that still feels like progress. Whereas just like losing a random standalone game, whether it's Pandemic or Spirit Island, it does feel like a little bit like wasted time. Like what did we get out of this?
Yep. I want to talk about Babylonia a little bit more because as we talked about it earlier, I'm thinking about it more. I think part of why I hate losing Babylonia, one is a pride thing. It's one of my favorite games, so I like to win it. Two, Babylonia is a game with good planning. You commit to positions and then you see those positions through and you can make little adjustments, but you've committed. And I think that whenever you have a game where you choose a strategic path and then follow it, those can feel bad to lose because you're dealing with the consequences of your decisions and the fallout of making the wrong ones in real time and then being forced to continue down the path that you chose, right? If in Babylonia, I say like, if my strategic goal is connecting these cities into two big networks so I can score a ton of points, and someone blocks me off, maybe I can try to do something else, but maybe I just force that play a little less efficiently than I wanted. And because there's nothing else that's better to do, it's the way I can score the most points, but I know it's not going to be enough points to win. That can feel bad. Like continuing with a decision I've made, seeing a plan to fruition, knowing it's a losing plan just doesn't feel good. And part of that is the scoring that happens as you go, like we talked about. And then also just watching everyone see like, oh, Brennan made a bad decision. Now he has to deal with consequences for 20 minutes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's enough here for like a whole episode, probably,
Yeah.
but because I have a lot more I could say. So,
Okay.
like,
Let's save
there's
it.
elements of games where you're just like, if somebody makes a decision and the rest of the table is like,
Yes. Yeah.
like sucks on their teeth, it's
That's
like, that's tough, you don't want to be in that.
It's the same pain as making a mistake in public speaking. I think for me, that whatever part of my brain is activated when I'm in front of a group of people and I'm making a mistake and there's public scrutiny of failure. Jake, I've been listening to Freakonomics radio podcast a ton, and there was a recent episode about failure. And I think that one of the things that comes up is, can you fail privately, or is that just experimentation? And I think that some of what we've been talking about in this conversation is adjacent to that, right? If no one knows you've made a mistake, you still made one, but it doesn't feel as bad as when you're making a decision publicly. Everyone sees your mistake, right?
I think one of the worst offenders of this that will be familiar to a lot of listeners is Catan, where you have that like first draft of places. And if you're playing with like newer people, a friend just recently told a story about like how he's had played this game a lot with me, a long time ago, and was playing with his, partner and another couple of friends, and his partner made like a horrible choice in the first placement of tiles, and he tried to say like, that's like not a great spot, and she was like, don't tell me how to like play this board game, like it's like a casual board game night. And then of course, like, the spot that she had chosen was bad, and then she didn't have fun playing the game. So it's just like, that's like just bad losing feeling on multiple fronts. So we could talk more about this, I think, in a future episode.
Cool. Well, until next time, we'd love to hear from you about games you love losing and why. The best way to talk with us and to talk with other Decision Space listeners like you is on our Discord. Discord's just a chat room that you can join from your browser, and you can find a link to our Discord in our show notes or on our website, decisionspacepodcast.com.
And until next week, we should thank Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out, whether you like it or not. See you next week.
Bye, y'all.
Close enough, 'cause I